Well, this is sort of an emergency podcast. We don't do this that often, but we have been asked a lot of times recently about this horrible story of what's going on with this 10-year-old. And people have been asking, like, how should pro-lifers respond? How should we think about it? And our team has been talking about it a little bit behind the scenes and thinking about, like, okay, well, maybe we should try to do a podcast on this. And then I saw Robin Atkins post a really helpful tweet thread. So welcome Robin back to the show, who is awesome. If you haven't heard the episodes with Robin that we filmed a year or two ago, you should totally listen to those. I refer to them all the time.
We'll link in the description.
It was really, really helpful. We wish Robin could be in studio with us right now. We are planning on having Robin back in the studio sometime, but we all cared a lot about trying to get this discussion kind of happening and published kind of as soon as we can. And so thank you so much, Robin, for being here. And I just thought that what you were saying on Twitter was just so much more helpful than everything else that I saw everyone saying. And so right then I was like, I think we're going to do a podcast with Robin. And certainly, you know, since so many people have been asking us for this, it seemed like, okay, we need to talk about this now. So before we get into the facts of the story, which we definitely need to kind of start on before we start kind of discussing the weird things that are going on around this story, Robin, for those who didn't listen to the amazing episodes that I did with you a while ago, quickly just kind of introduce yourself and talk a little bit about where your areas of expertise are, because they obviously overlap with this case.
Yes, thank you so much. And I'm so happy to be back. And when the case broke and I watched all the social media around it and the news stories around it, I was like, I need to talk about this. So I'm so happy I'm doing it with you guys. I would rather do it with no one but you. So I'm so very excited about that.
I appreciate that. That's super sweet.
So I am a licensed mental health counselor. I've been counseling for 19 years. In a variety of different settings with a variety of different demographic people. I am the chair of the mental health subsection of the American Association of Pro-Life OBGYNs, otherwise known as APLOG. And I am a molestation and rape survivor and a post-abortive woman. And I add those things not because they really impacted my opinions about this case specifically, but just so people know I have that personal experience with it. And I will try to, as I did in the other podcast, if something's a personal opinion versus a fact from my professional work, I will let people know, like, that's what this is.
I appreciate that. That's great.
Yeah. I've been specializing in reproductive mental health for the last 7 years, but working with rape survivors, rape trauma, and pregnancy trauma has been, well, sexual assault survivors, that's been my entire career. I did 4 years exclusively with the Department of Children's Services, and 85% of my cases were children who were survivors of child sexual assault. So I've done that work, and then most recently, a lot of pregnancy trauma. So that's kind of my background and where I'm coming at.
Yeah. Okay. So now, having said that, Robin, who I think has done the most research on this particular case of the three of us, talk to us about the facts.
So somewhere around July 1st, July 2nd, a story broke in the Indy Star that a 10-year-old girl had been taken to Indianapolis for an abortion. Now, when Roe was overturned by the court, trigger laws all over the country went into effect. So laws that were pre-existing Roe. And one of those, or laws that have been made since Roe, but we're waiting for the overturn of Roe. Right. And so Ohio had one that at 6 weeks, abortion was banned other than the life of the mother. That was the only exception in that.
6 weeks LMP, I'm assuming.
Yes, 6 weeks since LMP. So the story broke in the Indy Star that she was taken to Indianapolis. Dr. Caitlin Bernard was the doctor in Indianapolis that was quoted in the article about having treated this 10-year-old girl who obviously had been raped. 10-year-olds cannot consent. And at that point, it kind of kicked up a whole media storm around, did this story actually happen or did it not? Do 10-year-olds get pregnant? Do they not? Can 10-year-olds have pregnancies that are healthy or not? Can they withstand pregnancy? There was a lot, there's a long history between pro-life and pro-choice movements of, are stories true, are they not? And so I think, Emily, you're going to get into some of the reasons why people were skeptical. And I do think those are valid. I will say it's not that I'm some kind of like trauma whisperer that I know what stories are or are not valid. I will share that I had inside sources and connections in Ohio, so I knew it was true from the get-go. So I just want people to know that I knew. I'm not like I can't read people's minds. I knew it was true for that. And so I also just want to disclose that I have testified I live in Indiana, and I've testified on the opposition of Dr. Bernard in several of our legislative hearings and sessions about abortion bans and restrictions and laws and abortion pill reversal and things. And so I have some personal experience with her as well. So that's kind of the background of the story. I do want to bring out what we just found out 5 minutes beforehand was that it has been broken in the news that, yes, someone has been arrested for the rape of this 10-year-old girl. And it's really new. I think now the news story is about 25 minutes old. And so as we go on, I'll talk about how I feel about that breaking, both personally as a survivor of child molestation and also as a professional who's treated lots of children who have gone through this, how I feel about this even being a news story.
Emily, I had you look into, because I knew that we were going to do this episode, I don't know, a day or two ago or whenever it was. And I remember, like, you know, we've been really busy filming stuff this week for like all these other things. So I remember just like seeing a couple of people on Twitter that I generally have respect for on the conservative side of the political spectrum tweet a story about that. I was skeptical about whether or not this had happened, and I didn't even read it. I literally just saw the headline, and I forwarded it to Emily and like, just check this out when you can, because it might be relevant. Or, I mean, if it's just conspiracy theory nonsense, I don't want to. But apparently that idea spread a lot more even than I was aware of. And so obviously any people who were trying to do fact checking and said that didn't think that this happened were very wrong. And I'm interested in you guys kind of talking about, like, how did they get this wrong? How should people have been thinking about this instead? Just what have you guys learned?
Yeah. So in reading through a bunch of news outlets, basically last night, I found that in the initial days of the story, everyone was pretty convinced that it was true, just because this was a breaking news thing. And then some fact checkers had the time to start digging into it. And basically no major news outlets in the last few days have been reporting on this story without adding some sort of disclaimer that we're not really sure if this is true. Like, they'll cite the Washington Post fact checker and Snopes being the two biggest ones that did a lot of digging into this and said, we actually don't think that this happened. And so pretty much all the major news outlets were at least pointing to that and saying, we want to make sure everybody knows that we don't really know. And there was serious doubt to the story. And so I think it was a very understandable thing that up until 25 minutes ago, when we got new information, a lot of people in mainstream media were of the opinion that this probably didn't happen. And that was largely due to the fact that the evidence up until 25 minutes ago was purely anecdotal. So what was mainly pointed out by the Washington Post fact checker, whose name is Glenn Kessler, was that the source in the Indianapolis Star, which is where the article originally came from, was only pointing to one person, which is Dr. Caitlin Bernard. It was purely her claiming that she had gotten this phone call, claiming she had done this. When a reporter from the Washington Post reached out and asked the reporter who had originally done it in the Indianapolis Star if they had actually done any additional sourcing to get find out if this was true or not, they didn't respond. There wasn't even a no comment. It was just, we're not responding at all. And so that automatically made people skeptical. Then they reached out to the executive editor of the Indianapolis Star, and that person said that we have no additional comment. Our facts and sourcing is clear, is basically the quote. And so people were instantly like, they're not really backing this up with anything. It doesn't look like they did any additional research, so this is sketchy. So then the fact checker reached out to Dr. Bernard, and they declined to give any comment. And then they also looked specifically into what cases were open in some of the major cities in Ohio. So namely, they looked at Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, Dayton, and Toledo, and found that there were no such cases in any of those areas. Snopes also did their own separate fact check. They reached out to Dr. Caitlin Bernard, also no reply. And basically, the summary of their article is, we have been unable to find absolutely anything that says her claims are true or false. We just found nothing. There was absolutely nothing except her anecdote. And then really famously, I think this was like within the last 48 hours, there was a huge Fox News story where they had on the Ohio Attorney General. And he basically just said that there is no evidence. I've been able to see no evidence. If we had a case like this, I'd be able to see a rape kit. I'd be able to get some sort of biological evidence, and I've gotten nothing. So the famous quote from there was that he said there was, quote, not a whisper of evidence to support this story. And so that altogether seems decently convincing. Like at the end of the night last night, I was like, I don't know if this happened or not.
Snopes is a pro-life site.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
If the Washington Post and Snopes and Fox News are all saying, yeah, we're pretty sure this didn't happen, and then all the major news outlets, including ones on the left, are at least including a disclaimer of we're not really sure if this happened, I left at the end of the evening saying, I don't think this happened, guys.
Right.
And I think it's really, really important to now dive into why they all got it wrong. Because there's now public evidence that they got it wrong.
The AG quote is really confusing to me right now. I really want to know how that could have happened.
Exactly. So how did we get this so wrong, knowing the public information we have now? And why were these fact checks just inaccurate in the first place? Like, why shouldn't we trust fact checkers in a case like this? I know, Robin, you have a lot of thoughts on that.
I do. So first, I just want to give my own disclaimer that I don't think people, for the most part, go into this with the intention to deceive. I just think there's a lot of ignorance around what happens in cases like this. And so I think most of the fact checkers really thought they were doing their best to find data or information, not realizing what some of the roadblocks would be to that. So let's just start with, from the beginning, before my source in Ohio reached out to me and said, yep, no, this is legit, my thought was, yes, 10-year-olds get raped and get pregnant. Yeah. So I have no reason to doubt that at this point, just because that can happen. So that was my first instinct of like, yeah, it very well could be. Secondly, 95% of child sexual assault is done by either a family member or somebody known by the child or the family. Most of those cases, if not all, I can't say all, but most of those cases end up in the Department of Children's Services, Department of Children and Family Services. It depends on what state you're in is what it's called. But they're all called CHINS cases, CHINS, which is the child in need of services. And so a CHINS case is handled differently than any other case where there's been some kind of crime committed. Because the victim is a minor, their identity is protected by law. Yeah. And because it's often family, the identity of the perpetrator is not typically released to the public either. Now, I went ahead and pulled up from HHS, and you can find this at info@childwelfare.gov if anyone wants to look it up. The Child Bureau's records of when public disclosure is allowed in CHINS cases. And I actually just want to read it directly to people so they can understand why I, from the beginning, was like, there's no way anybody's going to find anything on this. Under most circumstances, information from child abuse and neglect records may not be disclosed to the public. In approximately 38 states and the District of Columbia, however, some disclosure of information is allowed in cases in which abuse or neglect of the child has resulted in a fatality, which is why we do sometimes see those stories of mom's boyfriend kills mom's child thing, or near fatality. The information that is disclosed typically includes the following: the child's date of birth and gender, the cause of the fatality or near fatality, the date of the fatality or near fatality, the alleged offender's relationship with the child, a summary of any previous child maltreatment reports and investigations, a description of any services offered or provided by the department currently and in the past. In the case of fatality, the name of the child. Now, there's specific caveats about different states and what they do or do not allow, but none of those apply to Ohio. So everything I just read to you is Ohio, where this case happened. So this wasn't a case of a near fatality or a fatality. So no public disclosure is allowed in the case. So from the beginning, my initial reaction to it was Dr. Bernard, as a mandatory reporter, should know, like any other mandatory reporter, you don't talk to media or the public about any of those cases ever, whether it's your patient or not. You do not. So that right there to me was a breach of confidentiality, assuming that the story was true. And that was more concerning to me than debating, is it or is it not true? But how do we handle these cases when they do happen? And so I think when I look at it from a skeptic's point of view, if I put myself in the position of somebody who's skeptical if these stories happen or not, it's almost too much to believe that a doctor would talk about a patient's private information that way.
Right.
Especially with news media, especially at this particular point in time. You have to remember, Roe was just overturned. Ohio's laws just went into effect. And Indiana currently, right now, is debating legislation on abortion restrictions, including whether abortion is going to be allowed in the cases of rape or incest in our state. And so to have it brought to an Indianapolis doctor performing abortions just weeks before our special legislation session happens looks sketchy.
Yeah.
Right. That looks like they're either using her or they fabricated her to use her. Like, that's just looks so bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I did from the beginning have my own questions. And I think that was part of my tweet thread about, you know, I assumed from the beginning it was a Chintz case because it was a child. And then who made the decision? Because, you know, if the child is in the state custody, then somebody from the state makes the decision. Now, not all Chintz cases are children in state's custody. One parent can still have custody and have a Chintz case open. So I still don't know whose custody the child is in, even with the new report we just got out. It's not clear.
Just to clarify, I just want to make sure everyone understands what you were just saying. When you say whether it's the state or like the parent who makes the decision, you're not talking about the decision whether or not to go public or something. You're talking about like who has the child at that point, right?
Right. So who has physical and legal guardianship of the child? So who made the decision to take the child to Indiana?
Yeah.
My question was, who made that decision? Under what grounds did that make decision? Did they try to approach any providers in Ohio or the Ohio legislation or the Ohio Attorney General or the Ohio governor about like, can you help us understand how that law impacts this? And we'll get into a little bit about cases of life of the mother and children that become pregnant from rape and what that looks like. But it's not clear to me. We still don't know, but my instinct was there was never an attempt to reach out to any Ohio providers, which makes it look more sketchy to me.
Right.
And then having Dr. Bernard being the one talking about it in the media. So I can understand how a lot of people are like, this couldn't be real. There's no way this is happening with that timeline and the people that were involved and how little details we had. But looking at it from having worked with Chintz cases, I was a provider on hundreds of Chintz cases. There is no discussing it. You don't discuss it. Couldn't discuss them with my spouse even. It's almost like top security clearance with the government. You just don't discuss those cases unless it's somebody directly involved in the case. Even then, you can't. Now, a little bit is different now that the news story is broke, and we know there is a mother involved in the case, not involved in any charges. I want to make that clear, but there is a mother around.
Yes.
Parents aren't under the same legalities as anybody working the case. So the county that the Department of Children's Services is involved with this case in, nobody working in that county should be reporting it. No doctors, therapists, anybody involved, case managers should be talking about it publicly at all, period.
Yeah. But the mom could choose to if she wanted to.
Yes, she could.
Okay.
And there potentially could be like lawsuits around that. But just like anybody can sue anybody for anything, whether or not that would go through, I don't know. But there could potentially be, because when you do go to court, even as the parent, you're told like you cannot talk about this with whoever, but you're not really told whether it's a law or not. So
So I want to first spell out a clarification on something that that you said earlier, and I know a little bit more behind it because we were talking before we went on the air, and I just want to make sure everyone understands this amount. Was that you were talking earlier about here's like the exceptions when in a Chintz case it can go public, and you read that whole thing, and then you kind of talked about like they don't even talk about in a situation like this, they won't even say who the perpetrator, or at least the alleged perpetrator was. But I don't think you spelled out the reason for that in this case, because there are a lot of like I am personally of the view, I don't know what you guys think about this. I'm personally of the view that generally speaking, we shouldn't be releasing names of alleged perpetrators or suspects in crimes before a case has happened because so many people's lives get screwed up when they're innocent or whatever. But like in this situation, obviously what I would like the world to be is not the way that the world is, at least right now. And so obviously people often hear about some adult has been charged with some crime and here's the, the update on the case, whatever, like this thing is in the news. But that doesn't happen in this situation, not, I think, to, in this kind of a situation, protect the, identity of the perpetrator in case he's innocent or something, is specifically in this case because probably his last name might relate to the last name of the victim, and it's the victim that we're trying to protect their identity. Did I get anything wrong there?
Yes, that's true. So in 95% of the cases, it's a family friend or a family member. So releasing the name of the perpetrator before any sentencing would alert the public to it's probably someone closely related or close by. And then all the kids around that person are being looked at. On top of that, it's not just the law enforcement that's investigating on Atkins' case. It's also the Department of Children's Services doing their own investigation on it. And so arrests don't happen the way we see them on TV stations, like Law and Order SVU, where like the big public arrest of the big perpetrator. That's not how these go down. It's typically interviews are happening behind the scenes. An arrest is done quietly. They're already in custody during an interview, like brought in, came in for an interview and then are taken into custody at that point. So there's not usually a big public arrest, and nor is it typically publicized.
Yeah. Okay. So one other kind of at least area of clarification questions. Some of this might be factual. Some of this might be like opinion based. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it did occur to me even before we started the show, like there are going to be at least more kind of hardcore pro-lifers that are really kind of like have been thinking about abortion for a very long time and are on the pro-life side, are going to be aware that there have been multiple pro-life investigations on abortion clinics, seeming often inability to follow mandatory reporting requirements. And so I think Life Dynamics with Mark Crutcher did this first. They called I think almost every Planned Parenthood they could find in the country and basically kind of did what Live Action later did with videos. But they're trying to get a sense of, are they actually going to allow, like, let's say a 13 or 14-year-old, girl come in for an abortion who obviously is the victim of a crime and they are mandatory reporters, and are they actually mandatory reporting? And generally speaking, all the investigations, at least from the pro-life side, have come out saying typically it seems systemic that abortion clinics are not reporting that there's, statutory rape happening. And so I just imagine there's going to be questions of, like, is the mandatory reporting or the kind of rule, or laws against the abortion provider in this case, talking about this in public, like how is that considered as compared to the mandatory reporting that's supposed to be happening anytime an underage girl comes in? Because I know that that's ignored a lot. And I'm wondering, like, is this considered like an even more sacred rule that has been violated, or is it on the same level? And the reason I ask that is because I can imagine pro-lifers being like, well, if they don't seem to care about this category of mandatory reporting things, then maybe it's not that much of a surprise that they would violate this other maybe version into the same category. But I don't even know if there's a category error. So tell me what you know and or think. That's
actually what makes this case really fascinating to me. And I'm going to try to withhold judgment, but I'll be honest, it's really hard in this particular case to do that. So I don't know if everybody's heard of Reprotection. Before Reprotection was its own nonprofit, some of the originators of Reprotection were already looking into violations of law regarding mandatory reporting. Dr. Caitlin Bernard has several allegations of lack of reporting.
What?
Yes, with minors as young as 12 and 13 percent.
And that's recent because the people with Reprotection, like they've been doing that stuff, I think, like for the last couple of years. And certainly with someone, I know at least one person involved has been doing this for a long time. And then, so, and for anyone who doesn't know, we've had Reprotection on the podcast. It's run by Missy Stone and some other people. Missy's awesome. They're one of, like, when people are like, I don't want to donate to ERI, but like, and I'm like, I'll give you other recommendations. Reprotection is like in like the top 3 of my list. Like if you want to donate to a great pro-life organization, they could use some funding because they're doing some really, I think, interesting work. And and I care a lot about this. They're also, I think, really effective at it. They're very professional, and I think every donor dollar is being used well there. So for sure, go back. We'll link to it in the episode of who Reprotection is. So that's very interesting. Go ahead.
Yeah. So Reprotection started in Indiana. And so Reprotection, the founder, is partly responsible for why Dr. Klopfer lost his license in Indiana and was not able to practice here anymore. And part of the reason he did was him not reporting children having been raped and brought to him. My dear friend, Serena Dykson, he was the abortionist that performed her abortion when she was raped at the age of 12. And so that was already a thing happening in Indiana. But yes, there are currently some reports that have been made to the state about Dr. Bernard having not reported. So that was really interesting to me that she hadn't reported, at least as far as we know so far, previous cases of children being raped to the appropriate authorities, more or less talked about them in public. But this case, right after Roe falls, right before Indiana legislation, she's talking about it publicly. Yeah. So to me personally, it's more egregious not to report to the proper authorities a rape has occurred. That's more egregious to me. As a professional, we are under Tarasoff law to report that. It's not just an ethics thing. It's drilled into us as mandatory reporters. You have to report. In fact, so much so that if an adult comes to me and has a history of sexual abuse that they want to talk about, depending on how we talk about it, it may not have to be reported. But with children, because they don't have the ability to consent and process all of the, how do I feel about if this person isn't arrested or is arrested, they can't process through all of that. It's mandatory reporting. I want to quickly mention Serena Dykson has her own nonprofit, She Found His Grace Ministries, which she started after she began publicly speaking about her experience with Klopfer and how her case was handled. So it is public. She has a book, She Found His Grace. It's wonderful. So people can look into that if they want, but it is a public story. Okay. So I'm not revealing any private details.
I will link to her book in the description. That sounds interesting. Okay. Yeah. One other clarification question. You read earlier, here's all the specific rules that Ohio is under, specifically when it comes to chin stuff. And I was just wondering, do those same rules apply in Indiana, or is there a complication with the fact that this child was taken from one state to another state? Does Indiana have different rules?
So that's a great question, and it gets even deeper than that. And I'll just try to skim the top of it.
Sure.
So for practitioners, you can't practice outside the state you're licensed in. So there was no issue with Dr. Bernard practicing in the state of Indiana. Abortion is still legal in the state of Indiana up till 24 weeks. So that isn't an issue. However, I have some clients from Michigan and Illinois and Ohio because of my specialty, and I am still under any mandatory reporting laws of anything that happened in their state. So yes, it is true that the laws are the same for Indiana. What I read you was federal, but each state has their own caveats to it. But Indiana and Ohio are the same. And so it would have been the same anyway. But even if it wouldn't have been, she would have had to, because the case is in Ohio, abided by Ohio's laws.
It's the Ohio rules. Got it.
She doesn't have to be licensed in Ohio. She can treat a patient in Ohio just fine, but she would have to follow Ohio's mandatory reporting policy.
I'll just, one clarification. She can only treat in Indiana lines, but
a patient who's
from Ohio, but she still has to abide Ohio laws.
Okay, so I feel like we've got a sense of the facts. Are there any other facts that we want to talk about before we move on into our next topic?
Yes. So I am going to assume that the story that broke right before we started recording is true for now, because we don't know any different. And so one of the details in the story was when the rape was reported, which was June 22nd, to the Department of Children's Services, actually the police department, who then referred it on to the Department of Children's Services. So I understand the temptation from anybody interested in the story, pro-life or pro-choice, to start diving down the well of, when did they do the pregnancy test? When did they know she was pregnant? Why did they wait till July 1st or 2nd to take her to Indiana? Dr. Bernard said she was pregnant 6 weeks, 3 or 4 days. Did they intentionally wait till after 6? I understand the desire to want to do all of that. At the end of the day, that doesn't address how do we handle cases of 10-year-olds getting pregnant from rape.
Right.
So while that is valid from a state licensing perspective, all of those people within their organizations should be investigated by their organizations about how all of that went down. But that is not public fodder for abortion debates.
Okay.
So ultimately, for the sake of the rest of this podcast, it doesn't really matter whether the story is true or not. We know now that it is true, at least as of the information we just got a half an hour ago.
Right.
But this is something that's going to happen.
Yeah.
There are going to be very young children who get pregnant from rape, from incest, and are going to be trying to seek an abortion in states where there are not abortions. And we need to know how to think about this and talk about this well, regardless of whether this particular story is true or what facts we know or we don't know or how much they got wrong in the original reporting or whatever becomes irrelevant because this is a real thing that's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I would like to share from the mental health perspective around that, and I will be testifying in 2 weeks about this in Indiana, is how we handle trauma and what standards of care are around that. So one of the things I want to clarify, and I put this out in social media as well, is doctors who perform abortions, I typically are not mental health professionals. I'm sure there may be somebody out there that has dual licensure, but I don't know anybody, right? And abortion is not a standard practice of care for trauma, for any type of trauma. It doesn't treat trauma. So in cases of rape, whether or not somebody's pregnant, abortion isn't how we treat the trauma of rape. Yeah. We treat rape through different types of therapeutic techniques, cognitive behavioral therapy, prolonged exposure therapy, EMDR. There's all kinds of different ways we can treat trauma around rape. And it absolutely needs to be treated, and these cases need to be referred. And it would be my preference that victims don't have to pay a dime for any of it. And I do want to get into just briefly, part of my thread on Twitter was, if legislators want to be concerned about rape survivors, there's a whole host of things they could be doing, regardless of whether or not they're debating abortion, to support rape survivors. For example, the 5,000 rape kits that are not processed in Indiana right now. The thousands,
that is still a thing.
I know, the thousands of rape kits that aren't processed in Ohio right now. The fact that it takes so many interviews per victim. Now, I'm in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and here we've gotten a lot better where we have a sexual assault treatment center, and they go and they have a case manager, a detective, a specialist, all in one room during the interview, and it's recorded. So the victim doesn't have to keep retelling their story over and over and over, which is great. But most places don't do that. And so when they don't do that, if you can imagine you're a 10-year-old victim and you tell the story a little bit differently, then when it gets to court, they try to pick that apart. And you can start to see reasons why people may not come forward when they've been assaulted. So there's lots of things and Indiana, I was shocked to find this out. I started researching what the sentences are for rape and for child sexual assault, and none of them are a level 1 felony, which blew my mind.
What?
Yeah, blew my mind.
Excuse me?
No. They start out depending on, so production of child pornography. So you're producing it, you're witnessing it happen, producing it. It's a level 4 felony with less than 3 years. It only rises to level 3 or 2 if the child resists. Why are we holding?
Why does that matter?
For the sentencing of the perpetrators? Like, it blows my mind.
So many questions, and I don't want to ask any of them out loud.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of questions.
I think if we just everyone takes a moment and pauses in their own head, you listening can come up with all the questions I'm thinking right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
that's unusual, I assume. Can I just assume that's unusual?
No.
Please.
Like, is most no?
No.
Most states?
Ohio's sentencing is horrid. Horrid. I personally know of a case where someone had raped a child for over years, and they got 10 years probation, even though they confessed. And this is in Ohio, and the perpetrator is suing the victim for defamation and can do that.
What?
Yes. Yes.
They can do that?
Yes.
But it's only defamation if it's not true.
Right.
Right. But because they didn't confess to all the parts of it, they're suing for the parts they didn't confess too.
Oh my gosh. Okay, but I'm asking, is Ohio unusually bad?
No.
Or is this fairly
common.
Everything's bad? Everything's awful.
Everything's bad. So there's lots.
Okay.
And I do want to clarify too, this is an adult. It happened while they were a child, and this is not my client. And I have permission to share that from the victim. So I just want to clarify, I'm not breaking Chin's law sharing that with you.
Yeah.
Right.
So anyway, yes, it's bad. There's lots legislators can do if they want to show up for survivors. Tons they can do outside of this. But abortion is not a treatment for rape.
I just want to put a highlight on that and give you a chance to dive into that a little bit more, because I can hear the pro-choice version of Emily having an objection to what you just said, that abortion doesn't treat the trauma of rape. Because if you become pregnant from rape, now maybe it doesn't treat the actual trauma from the rape, but there's this trauma of being pregnant that is now ongoing. And so getting an abortion in, I think, many pro-choice people's minds is an important part of the treatment of that trauma. And so can you just dive into more about why the pro-choice version of me is very wrong about that idea?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked, and I'm so glad you worded it that way. So we have a really terrible habit on both sides, pro-life and pro-choice, talking about pregnancy from rape as if it's inevitable the pregnancy is going to be traumatic. That's just inherently the outcome, which is actually statistically not the case. Statistically, 50 to 80%. Now, let me be specific. There's only 2 research papers written on this, and they're very small sample sizes. So I don't want anybody extrapolating this to, if they know somebody personally, their response should be this. But the data we do have says 50 to 80% are going to choose to continue the pregnancy and look at it as an opportunity to not only reclaim their own independence, their own power, their own agency, their own body, but to protect the second victim and offer that victim security, sanctuary, and protection from violence. So overwhelmingly, it's not the case that pregnancy out of rape is inherently traumatic. So we need to separate the two. When you think about physiologically rape and what abortion is physiologically, abortion doesn't impact rape at all on a physical level. It doesn't do, the rape doesn't not happen because you have an abortion. And so same with the mental health. It's not like the rape is any less traumatic because you've had an abortion. Now, you are correct that abortion can end a pregnancy that is traumatic. And so that's where I would start to say, okay, this is a genuine conversation around, if pregnancy is traumatic, should we offer abortion in that case? And so I just want to go back and stipulate, rape and pregnancy are separate things. Completely separate things. The way I would counsel or treat trauma from rape isn't going to change whether there's a pregnancy or not. The trauma from the rape is not going to change. How I treat that is not going to change. Interesting.
And for what it's worth, abortion practitioners, I think, know exactly what Robin's talking about, because, it's just the amount of facts that are stuck in my head that I only have used in 15 years ago. But Dr. Warren Hearn is the abortion practitioner who wrote, at least for a very long time, the medical textbook on abortion. Every abortion practitioner wrote it. It was called Abortion Practice. And there is a quote in that book, and I'll link to a picture or a link or something, but he, in a small section about rape, he literally says abortion does not unrape a woman. This is not some weird, pro-life view or something going on. Abortion practitioners know this too. It's just, I think a lot of people in the public don't understand it.
That's a super helpful clarification.
Yeah, I appreciate her saying that, because I often hear, we need abortion when a woman's suicidal. We need abortion when she's pregnant from rape. We need abortion in all these ways that pregnancy can be traumatic. And so that's just a nice segue into, if we separate the two things and we know how we treat trauma from rape, how do we treat trauma in pregnancy? And so something you said, Josh, it must have been a year ago, really stuck to me. It was a private conversation. I hope you don't mind me sharing.
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
It was something along the lines of, if we're going to allow for violence against a human being, we better be darn sure that's the best option. And so when I think about all the different ways pregnancy can be traumatic. So one of my pregnancies was traumatic. It was high risk. I had hyperemesis. I was bedridden for almost the entire pregnancy. There were several nights I contemplated suicide. It was very difficult.
Terrible.
Wow.
Yes. And actually,
So sorry.
hyperemesis has a 50% increased risk of suicide compared to other pregnancy complications because it is so physically miserable and isolating. But so that's just one example. And I share mine because I'm not going to share patient information.
Right.
I will talk in general that, yes, I have lots of patients that have lots of different types of pregnancy trauma. That does happen. It's not uncommon. I know I've seen a few very prominent pro-lifers talk about like pregnancy is not traumatic, birth is not traumatic. You know, in the vast majority of pregnancies and the millions we see, no. But because it's my specialty and I have a long wait list, I can tell you it happens with some regularity. So, yes.
And even if trauma doesn't happen a lot, pregnancies are still hard in general. Like we
just recorded a podcast on this.
Episode. In fact, I think this is going to come out before part 2 comes out, which is really going to annoy some people who've been really wanting part 2 of
part 1
types of difficult pro-lifers. But Monica Snyder, was this in part 1 already?
This was in part 1.
This is already out. So
Monica Snyder talked about, we recorded the podcast while she was 8 months pregnant.
Yeah.
And she openly hates being pregnant. And we talked extensively about how pro-life people need to stop trying to downplay how hard pregnancy is, and that even a normal pregnancy has very big side effects on your body and on your like mental health and on your physical health and on all the things in your life. Like a normal pregnancy is extremely difficult. Yeah. And so we need to stop downplaying this. And certainly there are pregnancies that are well beyond the scope of the normal. And those are the kinds of ones that you are often seeing, Robin. And so all pro-lifers need to acknowledge that all types of pregnancies happen, but even a normal one is going to have some really difficult experiences.
And Robin's not doing that, but I'm just saying, like, Robin's talking about trauma, which is like this different thing. I want to make sure everyone understands these kind of two different things.
Yes. And I want to add, just in general, if I could give a piece of advice to any pro-lifers.
Please do.
If you lean into truth, even if it seems at the moment inconvenient, like pregnancy is hard, when you lean into it, you find out just how ill-equipped abortion is to deal with these things. So imagine the millions of women who want their pregnancies. And rather than our society investing time and energy and skills and money into addressing how difficult pregnancy can be and becoming a pregnancy inclusive society, we offer them abortion. You don't want to deal with it, just get an abortion. Abortion has been a Band-Aid for all of these injustices and in ways that women have been not treated equal, these inequalities regarding just their own biology. So abortion really is the dismantling of a woman's healthy biology. If pregnancy has happened, it means a woman's body has reacted to stimuli in a healthy way. Right. And so rather than how do we then support the complications with that, it's just, so if you lean into truth, often you'll find where we need to be addressing our attention rather than trying to pretend things aren't difficult. Suffering happens.
So I'm glad you brought this up because now, and we weren't planning to do this, but I want let's take a minute and have you add and dive a little bit deeper into that, and specifically compare and contrast what you just said with a very cringy things that some pro-life people have said before, thinking people like Todd Akin and other legislators that have kind of gone further in like when they defend them having like no exception in the case of rape when they're doing pro-life bills, have sometimes said things along the lines of like, hey, if she gets pregnant, then her, like, that's what was supposed to happen, or like things like that. And I just like, it's close enough when Robin says like her body's working in a healthy way. Like, I just don't want anyone to misconstrue what Robin's saying. So can you compare and contrast that with like these kind of more cringy things? Todd Akin, I don't remember exactly what he said, but
there's like a famous quote inaccurate. Of like, if she has gotten pregnant from rape, then it wasn't a real rape.
It wasn't rape because her body was shut down.
Yeah, I don't know if that was him, but I've heard that one.
That was him. Okay.
Yes, I've heard that too, which is just factually inaccurate. Your eggs, when you ovulate, don't really care how the sperm got to them. Like that's not a thing. So, and whether or not an egg implants is extremely complicated. I encourage people to go look through all the Carnegie stages and everything that has to happen for implantation. It's mind blowing, but it's like whether or not you've been raped doesn't impact implantation. And so that is just factually untrue. But also, can we stop placing narratives on people?
Yeah.
So whether or not a woman feels pregnancy is traumatic from rape isn't up to us. While statistically, it seems like most women don't see it that way. That doesn't, and we know that a woman's biology is healthy, getting pregnant when the correct stimuli is there. That doesn't mean to her mental health and emotional health that pregnancy seems healthy.
Yeah.
Right. So we need to stop placing these narratives on women. I heard recently a legislator in Ohio said, pregnancy from rape is an opportunity. Well, that's a perspective. That's a narrative.
Right.
That is true for some women. Other women don't see it. That's an opinion, not a fact. And so if it's a perspective, we can't place it on other people. That being said, I would caution the pro-choice side to be careful how you talk about children that are conceived in rape, because there are thousands of children and adults walking around who were conceived in rape, and they are not all of the horrible things. When President Biden called them rapist child in his address, my heart fell, because that's not who they are.
No.
Yeah. And so we need to, if we're going to be compassionate, we need to be compassionate for all involved. Yeah. And that's the hard part about abortion, right? Because it's not just the mother, it's not just the baby, it's not just the father, it's all of these people involved and all the other lives touched about it. And so we can have genuine conversations about, when should we allow violence against a preborn human? Yeah. And I go back to, is there no other option that is valid? And so when I think about treating pregnancy from trauma, to bring it back around to that, the ways we treat that in wanted pregnancies is the same way we would treat it in unwanted pregnancies. The same therapeutic techniques are going to work. We might have to employ additional ones. It might take longer. The choice on the other end might be different as far as whether or not that person raises that child. We don't have any stats on that. It's just not researched.
Sure.
So I think that we need to take in consideration, if we tell people abortion is treatment for pregnancy from rape, then we're telling people who don't have abortions after pregnancy from rape, they're not healed. Their treatment was somehow invalid. No. And abortion isn't a mental health treatment. Now, that being said, it is absolutely true that many women, whether or not they've been raped, feel relief after an abortion. And I in my own, and I think I talked about this on one of the podcasts we recorded. I had some relief around, I'm not tied to the father of that. And that's still true. I am grateful he's not in my life. I would take the abortion back in a second and have him in my life today if I could have my son back. But it is also true that I'm relieved. So we can't pigeonhole that either. We can't say relief is the only emotion and therefore abortion is treatment of trauma. No. Yeah. Statistically, in research around mental health and abortion, relief doesn't stick around. It comes and goes, just like grief, guilt, shame, all of those things come and go. Yeah. And so one of the things that, just to kind of wrap all of this up together, that drives me so nuts when we talk about specific cases in public rather than overall ideas, it kind of goes back to that saying, wise people talk about ideas, unwise people talk about people. And so when we do specific cases, what we're doing is emotional manipulation, number one. We're attempting to shut down questions or debate around it, because how dare you debate what a 10-year-old victim should have or not have? Right. Like, are you a monster? It's intended to shut that down, and it doesn't actually help the 10-year-old. We need to provide the 10-year-old with standards of care, not what emotionally do we feel like we would do in that situation. And also overall, we as practitioners don't own those stories. They're shared with us, and they're sacred and they're honored. And so there are a few clients I have had that have said, please utilize my story when you're doing seminars. And I have signed releases for that. Those are the only stories I'll talk. They want it shared, and they don't feel prepared to do it themselves at this point. Yeah. There's a few though. But overall, it's okay to talk about, yes, I've had several patients who have experienced this type of reaction. That's fine. It's okay in my mind for someone who does abortions to say, I've had several patients thank me afterward. That's fine. Right. It's the specific cases that does all the damage. That's not our story. Yeah. And that's not a public story. So I want people to imagine this 10-year-old who we know now has been raped. Based on the story I'm reading, it looks like it was a family member. So they're dealing with that. They're dealing with the DCS case being open. They're dealing with an abortion, which even if you want one, is not a fun experience.
No.
And now they're dealing with news in every store they walk into. It's on the newspapers. Every time the TV is turned on, it's on. Their story is being debated as whether we're not going to base legislation on their individual experience. Like, that is not a weight a 10-year-old should carry on their own. Number one, should we base legislation on their story? But number two, that's not helping them heal. So it's just egregious, all of it, to me, that it, like, even the story today, I want to try to assume the best of people. I want to assume Dr. Bernard was telling the story because she felt passionately about this particular case and about this child, and felt passionately she was helping her. I will be honest, I did file a ethics complaint against her with the state because however passionate she felt, she shouldn't have been talking about it publicly.
Right.
But I want to assume that's why she did it. I want to assume the reason why the detective in the story that came out today was talking about it, because they're trying to shut down some of the public conversation around it. Like, let's just get some details out there so people know, yes, it did happen. They can stop debating that. Yes, we're researching it. Yes, the guy's been caught. We think, he hasn't been tried yet. So like, we don't even know.
Right.
But to try to simmer some of that down. Like, the cynic in me wants to say they're doing it to cover their butts because there's all this, like, why haven't you arrested anyone? Prove to us this happened. But no, I want to try to be understanding and give people the benefit of the doubt and goodwill. So I'm assuming they're doing it to try to calm the conversation down around it. And I think that's the way we should approach all things. If the story, I would hope that any journalist, if they got a phone call, hey, I got a 10-year-old, I'm doing an abortion today, would say, I'm really sorry to hear that, but I can't cover that.
Yeah. I shouldn't know that. Yeah.
Their story is not my entertainment.
Or to be used for my agenda.
Right. And quite honestly, my overall philosophy on whether abortion should be legal or not, and people ask me this all the time. Actually, the BBC interviewed me right after the Dobbs was overturned. And one of the questions, they are great at prep questions, by the way. I should give you some. They're so good at it. They were like, did your abortion impact how you feel about this legally? And I was like, I'm so glad you asked me ahead of time, because I hate that question more than any question. You can ask me about my rapes. You can ask me about being molested. That question drives me nuts, because the assumption is, oh, you're only pro-life because you regret your abortion. Right. No, I don't think anybody's emotional reaction should be what we base law on. That's a terrible way to base law. Like, the wind blows this way and that. Like, emotions are not fact. Emotions are our reactions to stimuli in the world around us to teach us about ourselves. And so, no, that's absolutely not a reason why. Mine is based on the biological fact that women are pregnant with human beings, and the biological fact that abortion ends the life of those human beings. Induced abortion intentionally ends the life of those human beings. And when do I think that should be permissible? And for me, it's only in the case of the life of a mother, because we have the right of self-defense when our life is threatened. And that's it. Yeah. So it has nothing to do. I will say my experience does impact when I go to legislation advocating for, if abortion's going to be legal, because again, I live in reality, not in Robin's dream world, where all pregnancies are supported and we all get to live with families supported. Like, oh man, my world is great. I wish we all could live there. But in reality, if it's going to be legal, what does informed consent look like? And what does safety look like for women? So, and what does choice actually look like? So that's kind of where I don't talk about, should it be legal or not? If it's going to be, this is what we need to do. If it's not, this is what we need to do.
2 hours later.
Okay, so we've had a break. We've had to take a couple of hours for schedule reasons. And so now we're back to finish this discussion with Robin. And the only reason I say all of that, instead of just let it be a seamless break like we usually would, is because, of course, as the story is still developing, we were still kind of reading articles about it. And we saw a thing that we flagged as like something that could at least appear to be a contradiction with something that Robin said earlier. And so now we've done a bunch of research and stuff, and we just want to clarify on it, because I don't think there's a contradiction, but it can look like one. And so we just want to clarify on that. So this is going back to the discussion that we were having earlier in this episode about how low oftentimes like the felony rating is for crimes like this. So we're not talking about level 1 felonies. We're oftentimes talking about level 3, level 4, level 5 felonies, and that being insane. Emily, real quick, why don't you tell us the thing that you read that you kind of flagged, and then Robin is going to illuminate the entire situation for us.
Yeah. So while we were taking our little lunch break there, I was just reading all these articles and I came across one on Axios that was basically saying exactly what we told you earlier, that there was this person who was arrested after he confessed to raping this particular 10-year-old. And then there is the sentence that caught my eye. It says, quote, "He was charged with rape of a minor, which is a felony in Ohio, punishable by life imprisonment." So the way that sentence is written, it sounds like they're saying this guy is almost guaranteed to get life imprisonment. Like, maybe not. They're not saying he is, but they're saying, whoa, this is super serious and the law is going to treat it super seriously, which seems different than what we talked about earlier.
Right.
And so I immediately flagged it, sent it to Robin, was like, we got to look at this. So after that whole discovery of the Axios article, Robin and I did an epic search in the Ohio criminal law code, which was an incredibly frustrating process. As a side note, just trying to decipher what on earth was happening, because it seems to contradict itself in 50 places, and I don't understand legal jargon. I am not a lawyer, and it was just it was very annoying.
Yeah.
But I think we eventually figured out what is actually going on here, what the real laws say, and so I'm going to pitch it to Robin, who I am confident can explain this way more confidently and professionally than I can, who really is not a lawyer. So Robin, please explain.
Okay, disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer either. But the best I can understand this is under Ohio, certain criteria have to be met for it to be considered rape in the first degree or felony in the first degree. And one of those is if the victim is under 13 years of age. So in that case, this would, if the individual is convicted, it would be, now that doesn't mean they have to charge them with that. So they have to actually charge them with that. They can plead down to other felonies. But if they actually charge them with that, and the sentencing, from best I can read, adding in all of the, I got to go over here to this domestic violence statute, and then you got to go over here to this other sentencing statute, whatever.
Again, confusing.
Yeah, very confusing. Anywhere from 3 years to life with the possibility of parole.
Which is an incredibly broad span of time.
Yeah.
3 years all the way to life.
I could be we're either going to take it very not seriously or super seriously. And it's just or anything in between. So
I think the Axios article was right in saying he was charged with rape of a minor, which is a felony in Ohio, punishable by life imprisonment. It is a felony in Ohio. It is punishable by life imprisonment.
Sometimes.
But sometimes. And there's no guarantee of that. It could be a whole variety of things.
Yeah.
So it seems like there's just a lot more nuance there in terms of what's going to actually happen in the court of law that decides what he actually gets, assuming he's convicted.
Yeah.
It's not that simple as just saying, he will get life, which is kind of what the article implies.
Yeah. So I'd like to transition us to kind of one more topic here before we wrap up, which is answering the question that I think most people are asking us. When they're reaching out to us to say, how should I talk about the story? It doesn't necessarily need to be about this specific story. Regardless of what, this is a horrible tragedy with this girl. But even if it had just been a hoax, as Robin said, this is going to happen. This does happen. People don't realize how often this happens. And so pro-life people need to know how to talk about this. And literally one of the emails came to me. It's how do I talk about this at all without sounding like a moral monster unless I disagree with everything the pro-choice person is saying, which is a legit question. At an optics level, it's just when it's the big news story, President Biden referenced this badly, but oh my goodness. And so I like us to kind of shift over to kind of apologist, a philosophy kind of land, and just give advice to pro-life people who are going to have to be able to talk about things like this. And I think, and I'm going to kind of pitch it to you guys and let you guys kind of do the bulk of this, but for sure, a lot of people have been considering, it seems like maybe this isn't a question of whether or not there should be a rape exception in Ohio and or Indiana. It's more of a question of whether, make sure there's a life with a mother exception, because on its face, to those of us who aren't nearly as familiar with horrible situations like this as Robin has because of her occupation and all the wonderful work that she does, like it's natural to think like is this even safe? Like maybe this is literally a life-threatening pregnancy, not because the baby implanted in like the fallopian tubes or something. It would just be by nature of her size. Like maybe this is just a different situation. And then we just got to make sure that pro-lifers can talk about life of the mother exceptions well. And so I think until last night, that was pretty much going to be our advice and our kind of primary thought is like, this is probably a life of the mother situation. And then, Emily, I asked you to do some research last night because there's a Google search that neither Andrea nor I really wanted to have to make. It was like, how small can someone be and be pregnant and have it not be a life-threatening thing? Like that's quite a Google search. It's like, Emily, I'm going to give you a research topic for the podcast we're doing the next day.
No one wanted to do.
And you were pretty surprised by the results of that. And why don't you just share what you learned? Robin, jump in whenever you want because you know a lot about this too. And tell me what you guys learned.
Okay, so let me start out by just saying that it is very possible for people at a very young age to become pregnant. So the average woman's reproductive years span between age 12 and age 51, which is earlier than my brain, having been someone that went through this, even thought it was. I was like, did I really start having menstrual cycles at age 12?
Right.
Yeah, I did. I just didn't even think of that. So,
some do a lot younger.
And some can't a lot like that's the average woman is 12 to 51. It actually goes on to say then the average woman's first menstrual cycle is at 12 and a half.
Yeah.
So if that's average, you can get a lot younger than that. The earliest actually known recorded one was at 8 months old. That was a crazy situation. It happened like back in 1939. She had an actual condition that caused her puberty to happen early. But like just for reference, hypothetically, there are all sorts of things that can affect how quickly you go through puberty. And there has been a known girl who started having her menstrual cycle at 8 months old.
And while that's super weird, I think it's not too weird when a girl starts puberty at like age 9, 10.
10.
Like that definitely happens.
Absolutely.
I'd like to add too.
Please.
A woman or girl can start releasing eggs without actually having a menstrual cycle.
Yes.
And not even realize that that's happening. So it's possible to have never had a period and get pregnant.
Yep. Which is wild.
Yes. So I specifically started targeting my research on the risks for pregnancy of children younger than 15.
Yeah.
Because there's a decent amount of stories about people being pregnant in high school. There's not as much like automatic panic that like that's going to be dangerous.
Yeah.
So I was targeting 15 and younger, which is mostly would be like ages 10 up through 15. And what I found very shockingly to me was that there does not seem to be any statistical difference in the likelihood of there being some sort of maternal mortality situation in women that are pregnant at that age versus women that are pregnant older when they are receiving the same quality of health care. In other words, there was this epic review, and we'll put it in the comments. It was a literature review in the Journal of Family Planning and Reproductive Health Care. And what they were trying to figure out is what is actually causing there to be worse health outcomes for young women, very young women, children that are pregnant. Yeah. And what they were seeing is that all of the additional factors, mainly the risks that they were seeing as being like always told that these are going to be the things that are higher risk in very young pregnant women, were anemia and hypertension. Those are the two major risks. When they were actually studying why those girls were experiencing those, they realized that it had absolutely nothing to do with their age and purely due to the fact that they weren't actually getting quality health care, mainly because of their socioeconomic status or because of the social stigma around them being pregnant.
Wow.
So if you had a girl who was 13 and pregnant and you had a woman who was, 25 and pregnant, and they received the same quality of health care, the girl who was 13 had no higher risk of absolutely anything than the girl who was 25. It was all to do with the fact that she wasn't regularly getting doctor's appointments. She wasn't taking prenatal vitamins. She wasn't like having the kinds of testing done that was being done on the 25-year-old just because she wasn't seeing good doctors often enough. And so if they controlled for that, which was the original problem, is a lot of the original studies that were causing some of this panic that this literature review was also going over was seeing that they were not controlling for all of those variables. And when they did that, they were discovering that it was really that socioeconomic factor and the social stigma that was causing these kinds of issues. So it was a fascinating study. As I said, we'll link to it in the description, or a fascinating literature review, I should say. We'll link to it in the description. It was specifically looking at 11 different studies. And that also led me to the International Journal of Epidemiology, which basically had come up with the exact same conclusion. They were saying that, and I quote, multiple large studies that suggest that young age is not an important determinant of pregnancy outcome or future health of the mother. It is not the age that's the issue. It's the other kinds of health care that they are receiving. And so I think that's really, really important to note here, that there doesn't seem to be as much of an issue with like the age. It's not automatically a life of the mother. Just because someone is 11 doesn't mean we have to say it's impossible for them to give birth. Becomes a life of the mother scenario. We need to be providing them with excellent healthcare, and we need to be getting rid of all these barriers that seem to be preventing most young children that become pregnant from getting that healthcare. But it's not going to mean an instantaneous, this girl could die. And
presumably, and Robin can agree or disagree with this, but like I would think, like presumably, while obviously we want her to have the same level of physical healthcare, she's probably going to need extra emotional, mental care. Given the situation. Like obviously, it's not like this is not an ideal situation at all. But it's shocking. It was shocking to me to get a text from you. It's like it's like physically speaking, it doesn't seem to be what everyone would guess. And so then I'm like, well, I want to know if Robin agrees with that. Does Robin know anything about that? So Robin, jump in. Is this like shocking information to you?
Not shocking to me. Not because I have any wonderful medical knowledge. I'm not a doctor, but because I get the pleasure of spending lots of time with doctors in APLOG. And this has come up several times in conversation prior to this whole story.
Naturally. Of course you guys have talked about this before.
Of course. Yeah, of course we've thought through the hard cases, and they've experienced some of those hard cases, and I've experienced the mental health side of some of those hard cases. So with the way that they approach healthcare, shockingly, is Hippocratic oath: do no harm. So they follow the patient, providing the best care possible. And if it arises that there's a complication, they treat the complication with the best standards of care available at that time, which may include termination of pregnancy. And it really isn't age dependent. They don't have a patient come to them, oh, you're, let me tell you, I was advanced maternal age at 35. I could have hit somebody. And you're at higher risk. Yeah, I'm such an obstinate patient. They're like, I might have my last at almost 40, and they're like, after 39, we like to induce at 39. I'm like, nobody's inducing me. My body has done this before. Anyway, so they don't, just because you're a certain age, presume what is that pregnancy going to entail. We don't know. They're great doctors. They follow the patient, and they follow what the patient's body is telling them and what the patient is telling them. So we want exceptions for the life of the mother. However, with that, I go back to, as I alerted to earlier, Josh, your point of we should only do violence when it's the absolute only best option. The way that APLOG looks at that employs the standard of double effect, or the principle of double effect. So we may have to terminate a pregnancy. Does that mean we have to intentionally cause harm to the human inside the mother while we're doing that? And so even in these really difficult cases of young children, from what I have been shared, Dr. Christina Francis and I were on a call with some legislators earlier this week, and they actually asked her that question. And she said, a D&C or a D&E procedure has such a high risk of perforating the uterus of a young child. They absolutely would not recommend that. It would be an induction of labor type of situation. And so there may have to be a case where they have to terminate pregnancy, but do they have to cause intentional harm? And so when I was thinking through that, one of the things I thought was, if a 10-year-old's pregnant and has never had a period, absolutely, they're going to need not only extra mental health support because they've been through a rape, but also I've had a medication abortion. That's not a fun experience when you've had periods. I was 20, 21. And it was terrifying to me. And so I can't imagine a 10-year-old who's never maybe had an experience of that at all, bleeding from that very sensitive part of their body, what that would be like. So if we're going to talk about when we employ abortion, which I would rather flip the entire conversation on its head on abortion overall and have us, rather than start with any presuppositions other than women and girls can do with their bodies as they please being the standard. That's what we all come to the table with. And when do we prohibit abortion rather than when do we allow it? And I would say we prohibit it whenever there is another option without violence.
That's a really interesting way of bringing that up. Yeah. I like that framing, especially in this specific medical context when we are trying to clarify life of the mother scenarios, which I think is so important in this.
We've been talking about that recently. Okay, so I'm like totally just processing this idea for the first time. It's like we were talking recently about when people kind of do the Minimize Project kind of summary of the pro-life position that we linked to on the blog. I don't even know what podcast we talked about this on.
This was the podcast we recorded 2 days ago that I'm positive will not be out before this podcast. So stay tuned for incoming new podcasts.
Anyway, we talk about a soundbite, like here's kind of a great like soundbite of the pro-life position. And we love this thing that came out of our friends from the Minimize Project in Ireland. And we've reposted that on our blog with their permission because it's really great. We're not going to go into all the details, but I was suggesting it might be that at this point, at least for a while, given how much the life of the mother thing is being talked about, that just pro-lifers, whenever you explain your position on abortion, you include, and if her life's at risk, obviously that's a different thing, and you can explain that with double effect or self-defense, however you do that, but you explain that just because it seems like there's so many pro-choice people who don't understand that practically all pro-lifers have a life of the mother exception. Now, there's super confusing language equivocation stuff that goes back and forth and how we're defining abortion and all of that. And again, we'll get into it future podcasts. We'll go get into all the details. But like, I wonder if this is a great way of doing that, but it's a different way of coming at it, because clearly in the way Robin's describing that, if we're saying like the question is, when should we, when are the times that we should prohibit abortion, is only the times when we're doing violence as opposed to some other option that we have available to us that's better, and we want non-violent solutions to things. You're getting a life of the mother exception in there. It's just a totally different I don't even know off the top of my head what my instinct is, but it's interesting.
I think a pro-choice person might jump on that and say that that's exactly why I'm for all the abortions, if you don't like clarify exactly what you mean. Because I've heard many pro-choice people argue that abortion is the only like a possible option in order to terminate a pregnancy. And so it often comes up, I see it on TikTok a lot when people are talking about evictionism. It's like, if there is this thing using your body, the only possible way I have to disconnect is to have an abortion. I agree you should use the least violent method possible. If there was an artificial womb option and I could Star Trek beam the baby over there, then I agree abortion should be wrong.
Right.
Because if there was a less violent way, but there's not, the only way to disconnect is via this killing procedure, and therefore the killing is justified.
Yeah.
And so I think they might jump on that and argue that I agree with you. We can only have abortion when there's no other nonviolent option. I think that that's all the time. Every time that a woman is pregnant, there's no other nonviolent option.
But so I agree. That would be a very clever way of getting around this. But, but I don't hear that from a lot of pro-choice people. Like, that's a bit more of like, I feel like that's like top 10, 20% of pro-choice people will come up with that. Like, so I'm wondering if for a bunch of other people, if this would be really effective with them.
That's a perfectly fair pushback.
I don't know. I don't have a strong intuition one way or the other.
I want to throw something in there.
Okay.
So if that was the response I would be given, my follow-up question of that would be, are you saying that pregnancy in and of itself is a disease, an illness, or a problem state?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not, then we have to go back to why does it want to be ended? Because we could say, a million different scenarios of the only way to stop this other thing from happening is to do this thing, but does it need to happen? Like, so the only way to stop my body from digesting food would be to rip out my colon or whatever, you know, like, or get a colostomy bag or whatever. Like, are you saying pregnancy in and of itself is the problem? Because I have never, ever, ever in my life met a woman who's had an abortion, and I've met many, or even heard a story, who just chose it because, gosh dang it, she just didn't want to be pregnant or just didn't want a kid.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
There's always another reason why. So if they're going to say, well, it's her body and that's the only way to end it, which is actually not true. We could induce labor, which isn't intending to cause harm. We could do a C-section, which isn't intending to cause harm. But why is she wanting to do that? If they're going to say, well, she should just be able to because that's the only way to end it, then are you not caring about the situation she's in or why she's wanting to end it? Are you saying women's bodies are inherently flawed because they get pregnant?
Yeah. Yeah. And we have an article where we got into here's a way to respond when people say like abortion is healthcare, which is like supposed to be this like, hey, as long as it's healthcare,
mic drop,
then it's fine. And it's like, well, not under the actual definition of healthcare. And we kind of walk through that. So I'll link to that in the description.
The one piece that we didn't cover so far about the kind of life of the mother thing that I want to make sure we get in there is the idea of literal pelvic size in giving birth. Because thus far we've only talked about like maternal mortality of just pregnancy in general and risks of pregnancy. Believe it or not, the pelvic size thing is not a concern to any of the doctors in the studies that I was reading, which I found shocking because that was like my automatic thing. It was like, can the baby get through there or not? And so I had to do some separate research on that I think is important to bring up because I think this is why it wasn't appearing in any of those studies. They were really only bringing up concerns about anemia and hypertension as being the two and only two things that are increased risks for a teenager who's pregnant. And that's because a lot of girls at that age have a big enough, essentially, the actual world is a diagonal conjugate. Didn't know what that was until last night. But they already have basically big enough space in their pelvis to pass a child through there. You technically want 11 to 12 centimeters in there. And if you have any petite woman, like if you've listened to the podcast for a while, you know I'm very small. I am 5'1". And I still make this requirement, and I am the size of most middle schoolers.
Yeah.
And so there is an automatic thing that's going to happen if you go to an OBGYN, and this is back to these girls needing really quality health care. They need to be regularly seeing a doctor. But an OBGYN who knows what they're doing is automatically, like literally your very first exam, when they find out that you're pregnant, they're going to measure your diagonal conjugate. How they do that, I have no idea, but apparently they do. And if it is at least 11 centimeters, they're like, we're good. Not worried about you. If it is not, they're going to keep monitoring it and monitoring basically the weight of the baby. And if they figure out that this isn't going to work, it's not going to get through there, it's not big enough, and the child is too big, then they're just going to schedule a C-section right off the bat. So this is basically something that they're very used to dealing with. Yeah. Because a petite woman like myself has just about an equal likelihood of this being an issue as a 12-year-old. Yeah. And so it's not something that they're saying is more likely to happen in a teenager. And also we know how to deal with it. It doesn't cause any sort of maternal death. It's not going to be popular to say, yeah, there's probably going to be some teenagers that need to have a C-section. Like that's not a popular thing to say. And I get that. And that's so we're going to have to treat that really carefully in an apologetics type conversation. But it isn't any different than me. Like an 11-year-old receiving quality healthcare and me receiving quality healthcare if I was pregnant are going to have the same risks of these kinds of things happening. So that's the other kind of tiny piece here that I wasn't seeing show up in those research studies, which is why I wanted to do that extra kind of dig to see why doctors weren't really concerned about it.
Right. I want to add on to that a small piece too, which is outside of maternal mortality, we've talked about how pregnancies can be very hard and difficult and hard on the body, even in the best of circumstances. And so I'm not aware of any studies because it's actually relatively new, physical therapy treatment for pelvic floor issues due to pregnancy and birth. We're seeing a lot more women who have great pregnancies who still need pelvic floor therapy because of just the weight of carrying a baby and giving birth and all of that. So we don't have studies on what that would do. So I just want to point out, it's not that we're not aware that there might need to be additional health care for the younger you are. And as far as I know, there's no studies on if you're not fully developed as far as breast maturity, can you breastfeed? Or like any of these questions around the age are things that we would want to approach it like I talked about earlier, where we follow the individual patient and we provide the best high quality care we can for that patient.
Yeah. Robin, let me ask you this question. So because I imagine like at some point this question is going to come to us. So what if there's let's just say a 10-year-old, and what if her doctor is saying this is a life-threatening pregnancy? I believe, in my medical opinion, this is a life-threatening pregnancy. Like, when we're thinking about now, like, we've always thought about this stuff in philosophical terms. And suddenly now, there's, like, laws being written, and they need to be written well. Like, at a governance level, do you have thoughts about how we should treat that? Like, should they need to get a second opinion in case the first doctor is super biased pro-choice or whatever? Or is that like, well, if you do that, then that can cause big problems because now you've delayed potentially a life-threatening urgent situation. Like, how do you have any thoughts about like how that stuff should be thought about and treated as like in the ways that we're writing state laws, assuming there's states, like for like super red states that might actually be able to have roughly an abortion ban? How should they be handling life of the mother situations? Because this has been one of the main things I've been worried about behind the scenes, is like, I don't want legislators accidentally screwing up the language and America having like another Savita Halapan-Avar situation, the young woman who died in Ireland from, it seems like medical malpractice. I don't think it was the pro-life laws there that killed her, but that's what the pro-choice people said did, and it helped cause the laws to change. And so just thinking about like, how do we avoid that kind of thing happening here? Robin, do you and or your colleagues have thoughts about the best ways to handle that?
Yeah, I think I've got three things that popped in my head. Number one, as Emily found out with me looking at the laws just around rape, could we just do simple non-run-on sentences in laws that the average person can interpret? Is that too much to ask? Our laws are like tax code at this point. Like, I don't want to have to hire somebody to read a law like that. Yeah. Especially as, a medical professional. You don't have time to go get a law degree. I mean, some are super achievers. High five to you guys.
but not all
the rest
of
them. Us,
right.
Yeah. One thing at a time. So making them simple to read. Secondly, we have to stop thinking about this as anything other than pregnancy, the way we would treat any pregnancy. There's high risk situations that have pregnancies for women that aren't seeking abortion.
Yeah.
And it's a triage situation.
Yeah.
And we don't, sometimes those doctors are sued too. So do we need to be looking at tort reform, which I know is not popular with my Democratic or progressive friends, and I understand. But do we look at when can someone sue versus trying to prohibit the lawsuits in general? Like, why would we want to try to, want to write a law to try to prevent somebody from trying to sue?
Right.
But if we can write them simply, and I don't think that we require doctors to get a second opinion if it's the risk of a life of a mother. I think the Hippocratic Oath falls into place there of like, you act immediately. And so I'll give this quick analogy. Yeah. Having my 8-year-old, I was told that it was an emergent situation and we were going to have to rush to C-section. And I was just heartbroken. I didn't want another C-section. It took the doctor over an hour to get to the hospital. And I'm like, is this really emergent?
Right. Yeah. You're telling me this is urgent, but I'm not sensing urgency.
I'm not feeling urgency.
This is different than when we had our youngest, like we didn't, we knew we were planning a C-section because my wife is one of those people whose hips literally aren't big enough. Like if C-sections weren't a thing, my wife would have died during the first childbirth. So we're really happy to live in modern times. But we were expecting just a normal, pleasant, as pleasant a C-section situation as can be,
sure,
just like non-problem. And we're in the hospital. There's like 5 or 6 other people and everyone's got all the things on. And where they're like, you're going to probably have your C-section like late afternoon today. You're going to be waiting here for a while. Fine. And then suddenly a bunch of doctors rush in and rush my wife into an operating room for an emergency C-section. And that thing happened so fast. I think they had her open in easily less than 10 minutes because an umbilical
My
cord
first
issue.
C-section, the entire thing, start to finish, was emergent. I was 32 weeks, so it was pre-me too.
Wow.
Less than 11 minutes from open to close.
Yeah.
Woo-hoo.
This can happen really fast. That's an emergency.
And they still gave me informed consent. They still took the 2 minutes prior to say, this is why we want to do this. This is your other option. What do you think? Which, woo, well done.
Yes.
So I was not traumatized by that C-section at all. So they can, if it's truly an emergent situation, doctors aren't like, should I contact the ethics board? That's not what they're doing. I trust doctors. They're going to save her life. And if there's a question after, people can file lawsuits in either direction. If it should have been or shouldn't have been, that's their business. But how we write laws make it very clear. It doesn't have to be complicated. If the mother's life is at risk, do whatever you need to do. Treat her with quality mental health care, including termination of pregnancy. And they don't have to get specific about that. I would prefer if they were super specific about termination of pregnancy without intentional harm to either patient. That's how I would prefer that be written. But I'm willing to concede that for the sake of ease of understanding and just say termination of pregnancy.
There are a lot of pro-life people that would be just kind of skeptical. Like, how do I know this doctor is, like pro-life, or thinking of this as a 2-patient situation, like actual triage versus 1 patient and this potential person inside of her? Like, and they'd be like, why are we trusting only 1 person with that? So Robin, like, respond to that person.
Okay. I love that, because if you asked the doctors at APELOG, does Robin trust doctors? They'd be like, oh, heck no. She's the most annoying patient on the planet. And she trains her clients to demand informed consent and ask for differential diagnosis and just be a pain in the butt. So when I think about, like, I don't trust doctors in general that don't give me informed consent. And I'm very specific. I want to know all the options and the risks and benefits of all of them. And I want to know your differential diagnosis and why you opted out of that one. Or I'm going to get on Dr. Google and figure it out myself, which is not going to be pleasant for you. So I don't trust doctors, but I also don't trust legislators or myself to presume we can write a law that's going to be in that room with them making that decision. I trust patients to advocate and to make the best informed decision they can with the information they've been given. So I think if we want to talk with pro-lifers about who are concerned about activist doctors, which I have met activist doctors and I have met activist mental health professionals. Number 1, if you're super concerned about that, you yourself should be going on to APELOG and picking a pro-life doctor near you if there is one. You should be asking your doctor, are you a part of APELOG? And if not, why not? Number 1. Number 2, always ask doctors when you're looking at a high-risk situation, is there an option other than termination? And what are the risks and benefits of that? And I think about that a lot. This is a whole other podcast. But when I think about fetal anomaly or even cases of rape, the assumption is termination. But what if we just stopped and asked, is there another option, and what is that? Because that's what informed consent is. And so I think it's probably better to give more agency into the hands of the patients than more agency into the hands of legislators.
So to sum up, for the pro-lifers that are here primarily looking for tips on how to handle their dialogues with pro-choice people when we're talking about rape and or incest situations with very young girls who become pregnant. Emily, why don't you just summarize basically how you would do that, or what kinds of maybe tips that you would want pro-life people to follow as they try to navigate that?
Sure. So while I went down that whole long road of research on life of the mother things, that's not really the direction I would go in an actual conversation. Maybe if the pro-choice person brings me there, it's helpful to have that information in your back pocket about what are actually the risks of being very young and pregnant. But I would mostly stay on the exact same track that we at ERI have historically taught to respond to the question of rape. We have a quick response video on that. We have several articles on that. We'll put all those links in the description. I think this case is an identical one to how I usually respond to the question of rape, with the exception that I'm going to spend an insane amount of time talking about how horrible rape is. Like, we teach people at ERI that you should spend a lot of time in that space.
Like, can't just be one sentence.
You cannot be one sentence. this is a case where I'm going to expand that even more. Like, I'm going to do so much that the pro-lifer watching me thinks that I've completely gone off the rails and I'm never going to make my argument. Like, I want to take the time, especially because A, this person is so young and that automatically makes someone's moral intuitions be different. And B, we know this is real.
Yeah.
And that also makes moral intuitions different and means it needs a certain level of gravity. And I may even add in a sentence at the beginning that says something like, I am going to answer your question because I think it's a really important one, but I want to be clear that it's going to take me a minute because I think this situation is so real that if I don't treat it with a lot of gravity, I'm not doing it justice.
Yeah.
And so I'm not here to just give this back and forth quick debatey answer to this question.
Yeah.
I will answer it.
Yeah. I like that a lot.
We need to treat this situation with the respect it deserves because this is real.
Yeah.
And so if I live in that space for a while, ultimately I'm going to end up doing the same classic trot at a toddler that we normally teach. It's just doing it with a lot of care that I think makes us different.
But then would you in this situation also bring in any of the research that you did that indicates that this situation at a physical health level is not probably as dangerous as the pro-choice person thinks, and maybe not even close? Would you bring that in, or would you wait to see if they ask about it? Like, is there, in what way would that research inform your conversations? And you've probably never thought about it.
Right.
So you're thinking about it live for the first time on camera.
So my gut is it would depend on how they brought it up.
Okay.
If they brought it up as a gotcha question.
Yeah.
As a, you're forcing that 10-year-old girl in Ohio kind of a thing, then I don't think I'm going to bring up how dangerous that is because that's not helpful right now. Like me bringing up statistics about likelihood of whatever is just like not meaningful. They're not going to believe it no matter what I say. I'm going to live in that trot of a toddler land for a very long time, see how they react to it, which is probably going to calm them down because it almost always does. And then if they continue pressing on the 10-year-old thing, then I'll go that direction. Okay. If they were just bringing it up as a gotcha and it's like, oh, she said something reasonable, now I'll go make a different argument. I'm not going to purposefully keep us there.
Right.
I'm going to let us move on somewhere else.
Let me add even more reasons why you're wrong before we're not moving on yet.
That's not helpful. So I don't think most of the time I'm going to end up bringing it up. If they weren't bringing it up as a gotcha thing and they were legitimately like, how do you think we should handle really young children who become pregnant? Like I heard about that 10-year-old in Ohio. Then I would probably do the trot of a toddler and then go straight into the risks afterwards. Yeah. Is my gut. I would never put the risks first. Yeah. Because that sounds like I'm ignoring how serious rape is. If I don't do all the common ground time and I go straight into, well, actually, you getting pregnant at a young age isn't that big of a deal. Like, even if I don't say it in a snarky way and I just say it, it still sounds snarky. Yeah. Because I'm ignoring how serious rape is. It's not even snarky. It's a worse word than snarky. It just sounds awful.
What if, this is off the top of my head. Okay. What if you started that part? If you're going to go there, what if you started with sort of this kind of interesting, common groundy kind of a thing like, look, I thought that was the case when I went to research it. Like, I have actually looked into all the medical studies that have been done on this, and I went in completely expecting to find out, there's some age around 10, 11, 12 where it's a life-threatening situation, and I was shocked to find out that all of the studies indicate otherwise. And I can send you the links or they're posted here or whatever. But that thing where it's like, it wasn't that you went in all looking to disprove some pro-choice narrative. Right. You came in just to back up what we all expected. Well, at least what we expected to be true. Yeah. Robin already knew, but we didn't know yesterday. And I wonder if that would make a difference in the way that they heard you. Absolutely. I still don't think I would start there. Yeah. But if I got the chance to do that, or felt like I had the opening to do that at the end of my trot of a toddler, I would totally approach it that way. I think there's a lot of value to that moment of common ground building and showing that I am genuinely open-minded about things. Yeah. I thought it was going to be one way. I did some research. I discovered that I was wrong, and it's actually something different. Like that's automatically a lot of humility on top of the thing that I was coming in with expecting the pro-choice side to be true, more or less expecting this to be a situation where she needs an abortion. So I like that a lot. Robin, would you adjust anything about that?
Yeah.
Oh, good. What did we get wrong?
Maybe I just don't have the patience anymore for long debate, or maybe I'm just debating too much on social media and not enough in real life. But I would say I concede whatever I possibly can now.
Yeah.
So from the get-go, I'm going to concede pregnancy can be extremely traumatic.
Yeah.
Rape is extremely traumatic from the beginning.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Pregnancy can be dangerous from the beginning. I'm going to concede all of that. Absolutely right. And then I'm going to quickly follow it up with, and I would hate to place any narrative on anybody else's real life experience. So rather than assume what medical care they're going to need, I will fight with you to make sure there are exceptions for the life of mother in the law. And I'm going to trust the patients and their guardians and the doctors to make the best decision for that person's care. End of discussion.
Wow. That is definitely a different approach.
That is.
And I think sometimes that would be more effective. I feel like it depends. I feel like because like the tricky thing is, like, we kind of teach a different style of dialogue than a lot of people teach. And a lot of times they do go longer. And it's like, sometimes when we've built some rapport, like, we can totally have that space to do more things and have it go longer and not have their eyes glaze over. But I think there's something to that idea of, like, if you're dealing with a more hostile person,
or
then,
you're doing an interview type of a setting where you don't have time. You're doing an interview for a show.
I think in that situation, Robin's that's exactly right. And I think my instinct is, if I'm talking to someone that I've got some rapport with, I kind of like the longer approach because there's all these other things happening of humility and showing open-mindedness, and we weren't in confirmation bias land. Like, there's things going on there that I like, but I agree. There's no soundbite version of it. So if you're needing something short, then I really like the Robin direction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that longer version, and the goal of the conversation too, am I trying to build relationship, or am I trying to find common ground as fast as possible, get my point across as fast as possible, and then move on? It just depends on the goal of the relationship. Yeah. So if I'm trying to build a relationship, I'm going to spend days, weeks, whatever we need to do to explore it. Yeah. And I wanted to give people my quick reply for when you get that response of, you don't care about rape victims, or you just want this 10-year-old to be forced to give birth and you don't care about a rape or whatever. Yeah. My response quickly to that is usually, I care so much about the trauma from rape that I want it treated with the best standards of care. And I want it focused on its own. The pregnancy is a separate issue. And if it's traumatic, I want that treated with the best standards of care. But again, I don't want to place narratives on anyone. So I just want the best standards of care for free from the beginning. Yeah.
I love it. I don't think we could have asked for a better person to help us figure this stuff out in the whole country. Robin, you're just such a valuable part of the pro-life movement. I feel like you're way too unknown and for like so many pro-life people. let's keep you get enough stuff on Twitter as it is. But you just have a wonderful mind and heart for people. I'm just so glad that you could do this with us, and I'm really glad that we were able to kind of like pull a lot of things together to try to pull this off really fast and hopefully help a lot of people. So thank you both for all the research and everything that's kind of gone into this, and I just appreciate you guys a lot.
Yeah, I just thank you so much. And Emily, this is the first time we've actually talked in any extended way.
This is so true.
Like talking to like my best friend. So I love that. And I just adore you guys. And I hope, Emily, when I come out there later this year, maybe we can get you out there and we can hang out and get to know each other. But I
we're going to make that
podcast
happen
with anybody else. So thank you so much.
We love you, Robin.
Love it. We came up with some ERI tips live right on camera. Hey, well done. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.